Hello everybody, my name is Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist and welcome to my channel. Those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. Those of you who are returning, welcome back. For those of you who are here for your first time, my name is Kat Bowser. I am a licensed therapist. I am also a writer working on my first novel. And on my channel, I like to dig into what I consider to be the heart of writing, which is the characters. And you get to the heart of the characters by digging into their psychology, figuring out not just what they do, but why they do it. And so that's what we tackle on my channel, from everything from character building to world building and everything that falls in between. So for this week, we are 1 week, as of today, away from Halloween. So I wanted to do a week-long Halloween celebration. So every day up until October 31st, you guys will see a new video from me tackling some type of Halloween-themed topic, ranging from villains to setting to tension, all that kind of stuff. So for tonight, our first night, I thought it would be fun to start off with my personal top 15 favorite villains. So this list is naturally going to be very biased because this is my list. I have included everything from books to comic books to movies to cartoon shows, anything video games that I could think of. And I think it's more fun to do that because I consider fiction to be all encompassing. It's not just limited to what you read or what you see or things like that. So, that being said, let's just start right off at number 15. And that is the White Witch from the Chronicles of Narnia. This was one of the first quote unquote long books that I read as a kid, and I remember watching the animated version of it when I was younger, and then in 2005 when they released the live action, I watched that, and honestly, I thought it was a very well done adaptation. So, what is it about the White Witch? I think her name is pronounced Jadis, that I find intriguing. Well, for one, it's her history. She comes from another world that she has utterly decimated with what Lewis called the deplorable word, which was essentially one word that she would say that destroyed everything. The fact that she was willing to destroy her entire world, including her family, gives you kind of an idea of how this woman's mind works. And when we're first introduced to her in the book, she kind of maintains that um, overall atmosphere. When we first meet her, she tells Edmund in the book that she could kill him right there, but she decides not to. I kind of like the approach they use in the movie, the 2005 movie, because they really build up her ability to manipulate and control people, and that is something she does with Edmund very well, is she manipulates him utilizing what he likes and kind of figuring out that he and his family aren't exactly on good terms, and she uses that to her advantage. And I love that kind of a smart villain. So that's why she's at number 15 for me. All right, number 14 is The Lord of Long Shadows. And this is from a book I just recently read. I'll be giving you guys a review on it shortly. But basically, it is a collection of lords and ladies that have powers and abilities over the land that has been decimated. And the main one is called the Lord of Long Shadows. And kind of like the reason I like the White Witch is this villain can be very charismatic. One of his main abilities is actually the ability to emotionally manipulate and brainwash people. And that means that his followers are it's almost impossible for them to rebel because their minds and independence have essentially been wiped. And for me, that's very frightening. The idea that something can take away essentially your free will makes for a very intimidating villain. I don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't necessarily read it, but essentially, this villain has rationalized what he's doing, not only to his followers, but I think also to himself. And that's a fun angle to take. So that's why he's number 14 for me. Number 13, I'm going to take you guys back to the 1980s for this one, and that is Mum-Ra from the original Thundercats cartoon. And I think Mum-Ra is very intriguing, especially for an 80s cartoon, because usually in an 80s cartoon, you have a villain who essentially is there to oppose the hero, and that's really all there is to them. Mum-Ra, while he has that, he also has, I think, a little more nuance than most villains of that era had. So he's essentially a mummified corpse in his regular form. He's very weak physically, but he can obtain a stronger form by appealing to his masters, who are the ancient spirits of evil. And what I love about it is that he is afraid of them. Like, he's in a couple episodes, you can tell he enjoys the power he gets from them, but he is terrified of failing them, so he's kind of in a bind himself. And he's also an immortal villain. His catchphrase, which I really love, is, "As long as evil exists, Mum-Ra lives." And I've always found immortal villains fascinating, especially when they're squaring off against a mortal foe, because it kind of limits what the hero can do, because they can't really destroy him. It makes for, I think, a type of adventure that kind of it's outside the normal types of adventure, because you really have to think outside the box. And the other angle I really like that they did with this villain is that, at least through the first season, one of his major weaknesses is his own reflection because of the evil he has done. I'm aware that sounds very cheesy. I'm not going to say it's not, but it was an interesting weakness. And I also like that they recognize kind of the silliness of it, because later on they get rid of the weakness. And it's one of the few times I've actually remember seeing a villain in a cartoon show who had a notable weakness lose it. Usually they obtain more weaknesses as the series goes on, but in this case he actually loses it and becomes a much more viable threat from then on. So that's why he's a 13 for me. Number 12 is Michael Myers from the Halloween franchise, specifically mainly the first movie, the original 1970s movie. I think this one is interesting because he has no empathy whatsoever. He doesn't feel anything. He doesn't really care about anybody else. He's almost acting off an animalistic instinct to kill, and that's very frightening. Speaking as someone who, before I got my license, I actually worked for 8 years in a inpatient psychiatric hospital, and you see a lot of things when you work in an inpatient psychiatric hospital. But through those 8 years, I saw one person who was what I would call what Michael is, which is complete without empathy, antisocial personality disorder. You do not forget it. It sounds like something out of fiction, but honestly, it's their eyes that really get to you. I won't, obviously for privacy reasons, I won't tell you guys too much, but I will say that this person, when they looked at you, it was just cold. Their whole look, their whole feel, the air between you just felt cold, and you just got this feeling that this person could do horrible things to you and would not bat an eye over it. And I think that's what made the Halloween franchise, at least at first, for me, frightening, was because I knew there were people like this out there. There aren't a lot of them. I will tell you guys that, regardless of what movies and news and everything will tell you, it is very, very rare to find someone that has absolutely no empathy. But when you do find them, they certainly work as a very frightening and powerful villain. Number 11, Morgoth from Tolkien's mythology. So for those of you who don't know, Morgoth is essentially the Middle-earth version of the devil. you have the Illivalar, who is essentially God, and then you have the Valar, which are a collection of essentially gods and goddesses. Morgoth is the most powerful of that group, turned against Illivalar, and all kinds of things happened. But I think what seals him for me is just the depths that he will go to make a point. For example, I'm going to spoil the tale of the children of Hurin right now for you guys. So if you don't want to know what happens, skip ahead a little bit. So the children of Hurin. Hurin was kidnapped by Morgoth after a battle and was taken to Morgoth's fortress, Angmar. And Morgoth essentially had him tortured to try and reveal to him a hidden magical realm that he was aware of. He refused to crack, so Morgoth said, okay, I'm going to curse your family, your entire line, and I'm going to keep you here prisoner and keep you alive, and I'm going to give you the Valar sight, my sight, the ability to see everything, so that you can watch what happens to them. And what happens to them is pretty dark. I'm not going to go into great detail on it, but let's just say that it involves memory loss, incest, brainwashing, and death, and all kinds of other lovely things. But I think the sticking point for me with Morgoth was he let Hurin watch all this, watched all these horrible things happen to his children, waited until the children were beyond saving or dead, and then he released Hurin and said, you can go now. When he could no longer do anything to stop it. That's a deplorable villain, and I love him for that. All right, number 10, the other mother from Coraline. So I actually saw the movie first, and then I actually read the book. But this is actually one of those cases where I think the movie and the book are pretty damn close. In any event, I've always found doppelgangers to be very creepy. When you're faced with something that looks and acts just like someone you love, but there's something that's off, and you can't quite put your finger on what it is, but it's enough to make you uncomfortable. And in this story, they really take that and they run with it. They show her kind of doing the manipulation that the White Witch did, giving her things that she wants, attention, material things, good food, all these things that she felt she didn't have with her real mother. But there was still something not quite right. And then she pulls out a box of buttons and says, if you want to stay here, I have to sew these buttons into your eyes. And then, of course, we find out later that that is just the start of what she does. And there's all kinds of other soul eating and things like that. And I really like the manipulative villain that kind of lures you into a sense of security, and then they throw something like this on you, like, oh yeah, I'm not really what I appear to be. But suffice to say, it starts a downward spiral of revealing the real monster underneath, and I really like stories that kind of make you face someone who you almost thought you could love, and then they throw this huge twist on you, and now you're left wondering, how could I ever have thought that I could love this thing? It's nothing like my real family. And that's always a fun psychological angle. There's so many psychological angles you could take with that. So other mother for number 10. Number 9, Piccolo Daimyo, or Demon King Piccolo from Dragon Ball. And I'm talking about the original Dragon Ball, not Dragon Ball Z, as much as I love it, but the original. Reason I like this villain is he's what we call genre savvy. So he's smart. He understands ways that people can potentially beat him and destroy him. And so he tries to take those out, which is an angle I don't see a lot of villains do, and I often wonder why they don't do it. So in this case, as soon as Piccolo is revived, the first thing he does is sets about regaining his youth and his power any way that he can. Destroys what was used to contain him before, and then destroys the eternal dragon who grants wishes, the dragon that gave him his youth back. And the reason he does that is that so no one can use the dragon to try and defeat him. And I believe that is the only time in the entire anime that they do that. And that's smart. I love a good, smart, strategic villain. And that is what Piccolo Daimyo is. Generally isn't the type that underestimates his enemies. When he leaves Goku the first time they fight, Goku is essentially dead. Yajirobe ends up saving him by pure dumb luck. But Piccolo killed him because he doesn't mess around. And even when he is eventually defeated, he finds a way to essentially try to continue his quest by reincarnating himself in his son. Now it doesn't entirely work. I'm gonna just leave it as he's one of those villains who takes the time to figure out, okay, if I was going to try to defeat me, what would I do? And then he tries to remove those possibilities. And that makes things a whole lot harder for your hero, and I love it. Number 8, the Joker from the Batman comics, TV shows, movies, whatever. Pick whichever medium you want. I like this character because you can essentially redefine him any way you want. We've seen him done as a jokester, we've seen him done as a mob boss, we've seen him done as a victim, we've seen him done as a psychopath. And each of those are legit. I think probably my favorite version is the animated series because he's both funny and scary. And I think that's a really fun balance to pull off with a villain, is have one that you can laugh at and you can generally enjoy their presence in the story. And then on a dime they can switch and you're like, oh, that's right, that this is the same character that killed an entire city. And it doesn't feel out of character because they switch and swap so often. And I do like that, aside from, I think, the latest Joker movie, I haven't seen it, so I'm not going to comment on that. But I like that they never really nailed down exactly why he acts like he does. We don't know if it's because he was a trauma victim. We don't know if he's just antisocial and just doesn't care, doesn't have empathy. We don't know his backstory. And as much as I do love a good villain backstory, I think with the Joker is one of the few times where I think the lack of a backstory makes him very interesting. Because I don't think he even really knows his history. And that gives you a lot of leeway to do a whole bunch of different things with him. And I do think he is a very good example of a good foil for a hero. So while Batman is all order, Joker is all chaos. And it's always a good thing when your villain is in some way a reflection of your hero. I think those make for the most interesting kind of pair-ups because the hero can kind of see themselves in the villain and vice versa. Number 7, President Snow from the Hunger Games books and movie franchise. This is a villain that, while I hate him, I also find him fascinating to watch. And I think it's mainly because you're trying to figure out why he acts the way he does and what he's planning, because he's another one of those very smart villains. He doesn't parade his plan out in front of you. He's very calculated. He can be very charismatic when he needs to be. And for me, I like that you see that there is some side of him that does have empathy and concern for others. I haven't read the books in a long time, but I do recall in the movies one thing they do is his love for his granddaughter. And you can tell he actually genuinely cares about her. Even though he's capable of doing all these horrible, twisted things to other people, because he has convinced himself that those aren't real people, though they don't count for whatever reason. And I like the dynamic between him and Katniss. One of my favorites is actually the fact that he tells her very early on, I think things would be easier if we agree not to lie to each other. And it's something he maintains. As horrible as he is, I don't recall him ever really flat out lying to her. So he keeps his word, and I think sometimes we forget that we can do very interesting things while still giving our villains a moral code. And a villain with a moral code fascinates me. Number 6, Naraku from Inuyasha. This is one of my favorite animes, so again, I'm biased, but I think he makes a very good villain because of how calculated he is and how patient he is. This is a guy that throughout the entire series is essentially behind everything that goes wrong. But he always has a backup plan. He always has a plan of escape. He always has a plan to continue to stay alive no matter what issue he's faced with. He has no problem with sacrificing pieces of himself, his minions, or anything like that to get what he wants. And I like that he's one that you're never quite sure if he's gone or not. I know a lot of fans can get kind of irritated with that. I like the fact that we have a villain that you have learned is so calculating that you don't know if you've actually won. Even when you see him, quote unquote, die, you don't know if he's actually dead because he has done this before. He has found ways to cheat death. And I think for a hero, nothing is more unnerving than not knowing if your enemy is dead, not knowing if you've actually won, because that kind of creates a sense of anxiety that just sticks with you. Like, okay, I'm going to move on with my life, but did I really beat him? Is he still out there planning to come back for me and the people that I love? Ugh, that is not a fun feeling to have. And I like how, kind of like some of the other villains I mentioned, he's very manipulative. He has learned how to turn people against each other, use their emotions against each other, use a charismatic form to get them to do what he wants. And I think that deserves props because I was entertained by this villain through the entire anime, and it is a long anime, so it was a long time to hold my interest without me getting bored with a villain. I understand I may be an exception to the rule, but I think he's one of the better villains done in anime. Alright guys, we're into the top 5 now. Number 5, It, from Stephen King's novel. Now I specify novel, not because I didn't think the movies were good, or the movie and the TV series, TV special. I thought they were done well as you could do with them. But the disadvantage is that it in the novel is essentially fear embodied. It can take any form that you are afraid of. And fear is so individualized that I think it would be impossible to accurately display it on screen. Fear it's an emotion that is primal. It's it's one of our corest emotions. It's an emotion that we are not ever completely without, and that there are psychological ways of people dealing with fear that you literally cannot illustrate. It's just you can't do it. It's not possible. And so I think that's why I consider it to be one of those novels that I really don't think is capable of being put on the big screen completely accurately, because the fear is so individualized to the characters. And just the overall atmosphere that he creates with Derry, that is just this overall sense of foreboding and nervousness and lack of trust and all the different emotions that make you feel unsafe, which is great for a horror novel. I mean, that's what you want. But for me, that's why I think this is one of the best villains, because it can literally take any form it wants depending on who it's facing. And one of the hardest things to do is face up against your own fears. So, number 5, It. Number 4, we're going to go to some horror books I read in junior high and high school. I don't know if anybody else remembers Fear Street. Those were my first real horror novels, and I still think the evil spirit from the cheerleaders set of books, I think there were 3 of them, 4 of them, there are 4 of them. I still think that's a great villain. I didn't read the later books that kind of delve into the evil spirit's past, but the little bit of the past I did get was enough. So essentially, this is a spirit that moves from body to body and inhabits different bodies when it gets a chance to, and just wreaks overall havoc on these characters' lives, destroys their relationships, takes control of their bodies so they are not in control. They can see, they can hear, but they can't do anything about it. And that sense of powerlessness was really what got me, is just this sense of, you felt this character's fear in that they knew what was inhabiting them, knew what they were capable of, and they weren't able to do anything about it. That is terrifying. I think that's probably one of the worst feelings, is knowing what could potentially be coming and not being able to warn anybody, not being able to help anybody, and you have to watch. That's sick, it's deplorable, and it's awesome for a villain. The evil spirit itself is, I think, a very strong villain, particularly because they have access to all your memories, all your feelings. You can't hide anything from them. And how do you defeat something that knows your every thought? I think that's why the ending to the books was kind of a disappointment, because how do you do that? But it's a great villain regardless. It's a great build up, and as much as I might have problems with how they dealt with it, I still think it deserves a spot on this list. Okay, number 3, Demona from Gargoyles. I will stand by the fact I think this is probably the best written villain of, if not all time, of at least the past couple of decades. Because she is a fully fleshed out character. You see her past, you see how she used to be naive and believe in love and all those kinds of things. You see abuse that she went through, you see prejudice and racism that she went through, you see her losing people that she loves, and you see her trying everything she can think of not to lose anyone else, but essentially becoming her own enemy along the way. And you feel sorry for her, but at the same time, you don't condone what she's doing. And I think that's an example of an excellent written character, because you can feel more than one thing for these characters. And for Demona, there were some episodes I was cheering for her. I wanted her to succeed because I saw what she had been through. But then you would see the extremes to which she was taking it, and you saw examples that did not fit her narrative that she'd created for herself, but she can't force herself to break out of it because it has essentially become her lifeline. She has created this this schema, essentially this sense of self in her head of how things go and how things work and why things are the way they are. And to break that, I think might psychologically break her.
I will have vengeance for the betrayal of my clan. Vengeance for my pain.
But who betrayed your clan? And who caused this pain?
The Vikings destroyed my clan.
Who betrayed the castle to the Vikings?
The hunter hunted us down.
Who created the hunter?
Canmore destroyed the last of us.
Who betrayed Macbeth to Canmore?
Your thirst for vengeance has only created more sorrow. End the cycle, Demona. Give us the code.
The access code is alone.
I really think it probably would. Because she's been alive over 1,000 years. She has lived through a bunch of betrayals. And she's caused some betrayals. And she's completely fabricated some betrayals. Some things that she thought were betrayal never happened. But she has convinced herself of it to alleviate responsibility for it. To take herself out of the equation. That is some damn good writing. And while I have not read all the comic books, so I don't know quite how her arc ends up, she's one of those that I mentioned before in my redemption arc video, where she is what I call partially redeemed, in that she doesn't turn good, but she develops traits that are more good than what she was. In this case, a love for her daughter. So she still does these horrible, terrible things to people, still is perfectly fine with murdering all kinds of people, but she is still also devoted to protecting her daughter. And I like villains that have nuances like that, because that's what real people act like. Real people have good and bad traits, and in Demona's case, her bad traits just have kind of overtaken her life. And she's one of those that I wouldn't necessarily say that she deserves a redemption arc, but she's one of those that if she was given one, I would totally buy it, if given enough time. Right, number 2, Maleficent from the original Sleeping Beauty. This one, guys, is pure nostalgia, I'll admit it. There isn't a lot to Maleficent. She is strictly evil for reasons, but she's so good at it, and she has so much fun doing it. And that's something I like to see in villains too. I love villains that have fun with what they're doing, and you can tell she loves being evil. She loves doing it. They mention a couple times that just petty things that she's done just because she could. I think one of them was she sent a frost to kill some of the other fairies' flowers just because she could. And then the whole main plot of Sleeping Beauty is she curses a child to die because she got snubbed an invitation to christening. That is remarkably petty, but I still love it. For a villain, I think it's great. I love it when villains sometimes go so over the top it doesn't make sense, and you kind of know that there probably should be more explanation to it, but you can't help but get sucked into it. That's what Maleficent is for me. I just think she's one of those villains that is so despicable, but you love to watch her be despicable. All right, last one, the number 1. The One Ring from Lord of the Rings. And I don't mean Sauron, I mean the ring itself. This one for me, I can almost hear people going out there going, what? The One Ring, what? Hear me out. Here's why I love the One Ring as a villain. It does have sentience. We are told that. It has an ability, essentially, to make decisions on its own. It can choose to abandon or stay with certain users, which it has done. The reason I love it is because the One Ring takes your own traits and essentially morphs them and makes you your own villain. And it doesn't just latch on to your, what we would call your lesser traits, kind of like your slight negative traits, like are you a little greedy, are you a little pushy, you a little bossy. It doesn't just latch onto those, it latches onto all of your traits and twists and morphs them and twists and morphs your interpretation of things so that you become your own villain. And you take yourself out, essentially. Twisting someone so psychologically that they essentially lose who they are. They lose the traits and morals that made them who they are. That to me is probably the worst thing you can do to a person, because our morals and our flaws and our personality and everything make us who we are. So in a way, I think the One Ring almost destroys your soul, and that's a lot different than destroying your physical body. In Lord of the Rings, Frodo has to go to the Undying Lands, where the gods are, to heal from his encounter with carrying the One Ring as long as he did. Bilbo is the only one who, Bilbo and Sam are the only ones who willingly surrendered the ring. And with Bilbo, it was a struggle. So for me, that's why I have to list the One Ring first, because it doesn't just destroy your body, it destroys you, who you are. I really don't think I can top that. Alright guys, so that was our first Halloween video, my top 15 favorite villains. I would love to see your guys' villains. Please put them below. I'm sure there's tons of villains out there I haven't heard of. I always love exploring more, so let me know. As always, if you have suggestions or comments, please also leave them below. I will respond to them as soon as I can. If you guys enjoy this kind of content, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss any uploads. Like I said, for Halloween, we're getting a new video every day, so make sure you chime in to see what else is coming along, and I will see you guys next time.